Hola, welcome to another episode of Two Diabetes Talks, a talk show where we will be addressing relevant diabetes issues, news, and more information about your diabetes management. This episode will also be available in podcast format. Find us on iTunes, search under Diabetes Hands Foundation or 2D Talks or 2 Diabetes Talks. I am Mila Ferrer, the Director of Communities for Diabetes Hands Foundation, an online community for those living with diabetes and their families. Today, we have a very good friend of our house, another Hispana, and we are going to be talking about diabetes among Hispanics. Our guest is Lorena Drago. Hola, Lorena, how are you?
Hola Mila, how are you?
We're doing great. I'm so used to doing interviews with you in Spanish that I find it so weird for us to be speaking English, but that's fine. Because one of the topics that you and I are always talking about and sharing information is how our community, our Hispanic community, is dealing with type 2 diabetes, especially. We know we have a very high prevalence among our community, and we're always trying to find for new ways of promoting education and raising awareness. So today we're going to be talking a little bit more about this. You live in New York, you work with a lot of Hispanics, so I think you're the right person to talk about this. But let's first start with some of Lorena's history. During our emails, one of the first questions I asked Lorena is, are you already kayaking? Because I know you're a big fan of your kayak, you have a house, but the weather's still not cooperating, right?
Correct. Even though today is a beautiful day.
But today's a Monday, and we're working. Too bad. So what's Lorena's history, your education, nationality, and everything?
So I am Colombian, but I am Colombian from the Caribbean. I am from Cartagena, which is on the Atlantic coast. So even though I am Colombian, I do not speak like most of the Colombians that you might meet that are from other cities like Medellin and Bogota. I speak more like Puerto Ricans, and because I'm from the Caribbean. So I came here and I went to school, and health is something that I'm very passionate about. And I am a registered dietitian, certified dietitian nutritionist, and a certified diabetes educator.
So when I started on this diabetes field, everyone kept telling me, oh, you have to meet Lorena. Oh, you have to know her. Once we met, it was great because we're Caribbean. She just said it. We are always like moving, looking for something to do. And Lorena is one of those person that she's always looking for ways to keep improving the education among Hispanics. She's been working on different projects, and every time I get an email, she's like, oh, I'm doing something else, or I'm writing another book, I'm doing a course for my fellow CDs or nutritionists. So this is amazing. So I'm going to ask you a challenging question.
Mm-hmm.
In one sentence, Lorena, how would you describe type 2 among Hispanics?
In one sentence, 12% of Hispanics that live in this country have diabetes. I think and that we are not all homogeneous. So that means that there are, even though Spanish and a lot of our culture is the same, there are still a lot of differences. And I think that this is something that healthcare professionals should know, because that takes a lot into account when you're counseling a patient. So I guess if it's just, again, going to the one sentence, that we are not homogeneous, even though there are many similarities.
And that's exactly a perfect example for that would be if I go to the doctor, I am from Puerto Rico, and my doctor would tell me, hey, you need to stop eating tacos and burritos. And I would be like, but that's not what I eat. We do have several countries, Hispanics from a lot of different countries, and we eat, even though we speak Spanish, we have very different cultures and very different ways of eating and customs. So this is very important. And sometimes that it's hard for people that are not Hispanics to understand, because when you say, oh, they are Americans, Americans are pretty much one big group, but Hispanics, it's divided into several different countries. And what do you think, Lorena, are the biggest challenges Hispanics with type 2 face living in the States?
I think there are many, but I am going to list them, and that's because I am giving two presentations, and I just want to say, at the end of this month, I'm going to South Dakota. South Dakota, I was invited to speak about Hispanics with diabetes, and I was asked to speak about cultural competency and cross-cultural communications. So from all the places that you would think, South Dakota, because their Hispanic population is increasing. And diabetes educators want to be able to be more skillful in the cross counseling encounters. So what are some of the challenges? The challenges, of course, we have language, we have access to healthcare. And when I say access, it's not just the uninsured, it's just individuals that have insurance, but their insurance does not cover for either sometimes medication, strips, or the visits are on days that they cannot come to the doctor's visits because they're working. So there is the socioeconomic status of many Hispanics that are unable to pay for these services. There is a tremendous lack of awareness about the condition, how to manage the condition. Many Hispanics do not know what an A1C is, as basic as it is. And you know, Mila, how much time you spend educating your peers. And there are still many Hispanics that don't know what an A1C is. So those are some of the challenges off the top of my head that they face. In addition to literacy and also challenges with food.
Oh, yeah. So that's not a promising list, Lorena. It's a list that it's a lot to take on. But I think if we could use one word to describe your list, I think the first one would be lack of education. I think, and this is something that I have always mentioned, I feel like sometimes our Hispanic community sees diabetes as something that it's not super important, because my grandpa, my grandma, everyone in my family has lived with type 2, and I grew up listening about it. So yeah, I don't have to worry about. Once it happens, well, it's going to happen. But there's a lot we can do to modify, to prevent, or to just delay that diagnosis. And that's why we're always like trying to push good information in Spanish for our Hispanic community. And also, one of the things that I want to mention in this interview is that this interview is targeted not only to people already living with type 2 diabetes, but we want millennials, the younger generation that is taking care of their grandparents or their parents that are living with type 2. If you're a millennial, there are a lot of things that you can do to prevent it or delay it. So let's start learning from a younger age and start modifying your lifestyle. So you gave us the list of the challenges. So what is the role of diabetes education among people with type 2, especially Hispanics?
Yes, I think is to first awareness. The other one is education. The other one is advocacy. And another one is support. So I feel that my role as a diabetes educator is to create awareness about diabetes, the symptoms, and also ways to prevent it and to manage it. My other piece is education, is to provide at large education to other healthcare professionals and people with diabetes and their families. I also want to advocate for them, and that is on the legislation. What legislation is important to support patients when it comes to medications, when it comes to access and healthcare? And the other one is to support them, to let them know that I am on their side, and that I am here to listen and to help. So I think that that should be at least one of the roles. And sometimes we play a bigger role in one than the other. Sometimes you support more, sometimes it's more advocacy, and sometimes it's more education.
Is there any way we can clone you, Lorena, and have a lot, like a big group of Lorenas everywhere? This is incredible. And I think you have mentioned a couple of things that I have never heard ACD said, like, I'm going to advocate for my patients. I'm going to advocate for them. And that's critical because sometimes we don't know what we need. We don't know how to advocate for what we need. And you are Hispanic, you are a CDE, but you do understand it. And I want to mention something. You have any direct relationship with diabetes? Like you have type 1, type 2, any family members?
No, believe it or not. I don't have diabetes. I don't have any close family members with diabetes. I have a second cousin who had gestational diabetes, but she doesn't have it. So there is no one that is related to me by blood that has diabetes. But I feel as a very integral part of the diabetes community. And I became a diabetes educator because of my patients. And then I grew to love them, cherish them, as well as the entire diabetes community.
That is amazing. I repeat my question. We need to clone you 1,000 million times.
Here.
My God. So Lorena, what are some, you mentioned that language can be a cultural barrier, level of education. How can a doctor help that patient that it's been diagnosed with type 2, but he doesn't understand like an entire visit to his clinic in English? What options do people have? Because we know that sometimes we get translators, but if they don't know the terms, if they don't understand the words they use, you get lost in translation. Like there's a lot of that message that it's going to be lost. What are those cultural barriers, and how can CDEs or doctors help their type 2 patients that are Hispanics?
Yeah, well, so precisely, I feel that we have to ask more questions than just provide information, because many times those questions can help to address certain issues that you're not going to know. It is impossible to know every single culture, every single nuance of the culture, but it is important to ask several questions. And this is what I have even included in my patient questionnaire. And I'm going to share some with you that I feel that have helped a great deal to understand. And that is, and this is all related to food. What foods do you eat now that you have diabetes to help you manage diabetes? Which foods do you avoid because you have diabetes? And just by asking those two questions, and I'm going to tell you a little story. I asked the patient, both Hispanics, husband and wife, who came to my office, and I asked them, what foods do you avoid now that you have diabetes? And she says to me, I avoid oranges, lemons, and limes. And I kept thinking, why lemons, why limes? And I'm thinking, and I couldn't understand was a problem. So then I asked the question, why do you avoid lemons and limes? And she says, well, because my husband also has gout. And I said, gout, and I still can't connect. So then she says, well, the doctor said his uric acid was high. So she thought that everything that was acidic had to be eliminated from the diet because of the uric acid. So then I started to help her understand the relationship between uric acid and patients with type 2. There is an increase in gout. But had I not asked that question, about what do you avoid or what do you eat more of, I would have never um, understood that there are some nuances that people have. So I would say ask more questions. And another question that Jeff from Children with Diabetes, he suggested that there's another question that we should ask, especially our patients that don't have access to healthcare or are uninsured. And that is, how do you access or get your testing supplies, your medications? Because we think in terms of food insecurity, meaning patients don't have enough money to buy food or healthy food, but we are not asking about their strips. We are not asking about their medication. So that should also be part of that questionnaire. Do you Are you able to access this? Not just to prescribe and say use them, but are you able to acquire them? So asking more questions.
And I think those are extremely valuable tips, Lorena, because as we mentioned, you have to get, as a doctor or CD, you have to get to know your patient. You have to get to know their background. Sometimes a doctor might say, "Oh, this patient it's not compliant," a word which I don't like. But have you asked him what it's his life going on? What's going on at home? Does he has the money to buy whatever he needs? So before making that judgment call, let's sit down with that person and talk about, hey, how's the family going? And that's something that I think we need to do. But on the other hand, we understand that doctors are always like, they need to see so many patients that they don't have the time to do that. So if I'm a patient, how can I make sure that whenever I go to my doctor, even though I know like he's going to be rushing me, how can I make sure he knows what I'm going through or what my needs are?
Right, right. So I think from the part of the doctor, referrals are very important. That's number one. And then asking the right questions. I think, and also when we educate patients, is write down some of your burning questions and bring them with you when you go to the doctor. That's also, so it's part of making the patient aware and more proactive in their health. And then with the doctor, if you only have 10 minutes, 15 minutes, then it is okay to refer and to say, there is an expert that can help you with this, and then guide that process.
Lorena, what is the most common question you get, you receive from your patients at your clinic? There must be one question that you're like, oh, that's it. That's the one.
What can I eat now?
And that's such a hard one.
Or the negative one is, what foods I cannot eat anymore.
So now that we're talking about foods, you have the most interesting book that I have ever seen. It's called Beyond Rice and Beans. Why rice and beans? For example, in Puerto Rico, we do eat a lot of rice and beans. In Cuba, in some different countries. But for example, in Mexico, it's different. Colombia, it's different. Venezuela. So we don't all eat the same thing as we mentioned before. Tell us a little bit about your book. Where can people purchase it?
Yes. Well, Beyond Rice and Beans started because every time that especially in New York, where most of the Hispanic population is from the Caribbean, everyone kept saying, "Oh, you rice and beans eaters, rice and beans," and that always stuck with me. So I wanted a book that was targeting Hispanics, and then I thought, well, I am going to include other foods. I am going to include other things. So I want this book to be beyond rice and beans, because it's not just about that. It's about fruits and vegetables and oils, etc. So that's why I titled it Beyond Rice and Beans. And the American Diabetes Association agreed that that was a catchy title. And the book is in English on one side and it's in Spanish on the other. I wanted a family that was bilingual to be able to buy just one book, and it could be shared by people who preferred English or preferred Spanish. And it's really just about talking about the different foods and health, shopping, etc. And it could be purchased at diabetes.org or in Amazon.
That is great. I'm looking forward to pretty soon do a giveaway about your book because it's very interesting, especially for those families that are newly diagnosed with type 2 and that are Hispanics. There is so much information. And as you mentioned, it's in English and Spanish. So you covered all the bases there. It's a great, great book. I don't have mine here because I lent it out to a cousin that she was diagnosed with type 2. And I'm like, okay, you have to read this book. But I'm looking forward for her to give it back to me. So what are some tips, Lorena, you can give our Hispanic community that are trying to eat healthier, but also they don't want to lose their typical food? How can they do that?
Yes. So I think that the emphasis is on less processed foods, which I think regardless of what kind of meal plan, that seems to be consistent. Less processed food, more emphasis on plant-based. And I'm not saying that animal foods could not be part of a diet, but plant foods meaning more fruits, more vegetables, more legumes, which are the beans, garbanzos, more of the nuts and seeds. So an emphasis on the plant foods and lean animal meats and healthy oils. So healthy oils like olive oil, avocado, oils from the nuts, that should be the emphasis, everything in the appropriate portions for the individuals. So I think that should probably be the key message, and think about what are the foods in our cultures that are healthy that we should think of. Going back to beyond rice and beans, beans is really a very important and nutrient dense foods. Avocado, it's also very prevalent in our kitchen. That is also a good fact. We use corn. Corn in itself is a wholesome food, and including that as well. So we do have foods that are part of that healthy eating plan.
I am hungry listening to you talk about all those yummy foods. And that's true. In our house, I am from Puerto Rico. My husband's family is from Cuba. So we have, oh my God, the most awesome food in both of those countries. But we have learned how to cook them in a healthier way. We have learned how to change the fats they were using in the original dishes. And my kids, they do still enjoy their Puerto Rican and Cuban food, which is Caribbean food. So in general, Lorena, what do you think it's missing from the diabetes education progress process in the Hispanic community? If you can say, okay, I think Hispanics would be much better if we fill the blank.
I think that Hispanics would be much better if they become more engaged and increase their knowledge about diabetes. And because knowledge is power. I know that it's a cliche, but it is the truth. And what we see, and I'm going back to this study because I am getting this presentation ready, and I just want to share this, Mila. There was a study not too long ago, about 2 years ago, of 16,000 Hispanics, both in Chicago, Miami, New York, and also the West Coast. And what we saw was that the results of the study showed that when persons with diabetes who were older and now had Medicare and increased their health visits, their A1C was closer to the goal compared to other groups who didn't have the awareness and didn't have the healthcare access. So that shows that when you're more aware, when you learn more, hopefully the behavior starts to change. That there is that pivot that eventually people say, oh, I need to be a little bit more aware about that.
But we don't want to wait until people go on Medicare for them to do that
Exactly.
change. We need to
Exactly.
start so much, like with so much more time before. Especially, I always say this to families with kids. If you have kids, it's our responsibility to teach them how to eat correctly. If we teach them since they're young, we probably are gonna provide them a good base, so whenever they go on their own, they remember that their body, it's a perfect machine, that it needs good food, it needs to be well nurtured, it needs exercise, physical activity, but we have to be the examples of that. And if you're an adult that you have been diagnosed with type 2, see this opportunity as a way to teach your kids to eat healthier too, because at some point we want to see if we can actually change the trends on the diabetes numbers, which are pretty scary, especially among Hispanics.
Yes, yes. And also, one thing that was very interesting to me was that socioeconomic status was one of the most important factors to determine how a person had, um, and I'm losing the word here, how a person, status, health status was. So that means that the more lower the socioeconomic status, the worse the health, whether it was the A1C, whether it was cholesterol level was. So they're very closely tied together, more so than age, more so than BMI, country of origin, etc. So we need to help. We need to continue creating awareness and helping
Mhm.
so that some of these trends are shifted in other directions.
Oh yeah, we need these. So Lorena, a couple of final words. Can you provide us with a couple of tips for people that are recently diagnosed with type 2 or have been living with type 2 for a while, but they just a couple of quick tips that you can provide us.
Okay, so the first is if you have just been diagnosed with type 2, and it's very scary, very, very scary, that the most important thing is to know that you're not alone, that there are other people that have gone through that you don't have to learn everything all at once, and that there are organizations and there are healthcare professionals to help you along this, this path, to start changing certain things. Um, Attending to your doctor's visits, start looking at your lifestyle. If you smoke, stop smoking. And if you need help, there are agencies that can help with smoking cessation, and then focusing on food, the quality of your food, and your lifestyle, and continue going to your appointments and reading and becoming informed. For somebody that already has diabetes, find ways that you can fine tune it, because many times people just have diabetes for so long, and sometimes they just don't want to focus on their diabetes anymore. So they might just deviate and shift. So find one thing that you can improve. It could be lifestyle choices, it could be stress factors, it could be anything at all that you want to improve. And check to see if you have um, gone to all of your appointments? When was the last time that you went to see the ophthalmologist or the podiatrist? And then schedule an appointment to follow up with your doctor.
Thank you, Lorena. That was great. And I think that's very important. Let's go to all those follow-up visits. Sometimes we think, oh, we love to procrastinate and, oh, I'll do it later. I'll do it later. But maybe later it's going to be too late. And there's a lot we can do to prevent a lot of stuff. Thank you so much for joining us. I already, while we were talking, I already have another topic that I would love for you to share with us some of your knowledge in the future. Thank you, Lorena. I really appreciate that you made the time.
Thank you so much.
So we have come to the end of today's episode of To Diabetes Talk. Don't forget, Diabetes Hands Foundation has 2 online communities for those living with diabetes and their loved ones. Es Tu Diabetes en español and To Diabetes in English. They are both completely free, and we want to make sure that everyone that has been touched with diabetes, they know that they are not alone. As Lorena mentioned, we're a big group of people going through the same thing. So we want to be there for you whenever you need us. Remember, download this episode. It's going to be in a podcast format. Go to iTunes and look for us under Diabetes Hands Foundation or To Diabetes Talks. So let's talk until next week. See you later. And if you want to share any, or you want to suggest any topics, let us know. We'll be happy to make that happen. Gracias, Lorena. Adiós.
Gracias. Chao, Mila.
Ya no estamos grabando.
Perfecto.
¿Sabes qué me intrigó mucho? El tema de gout y tipo 2.
Oh, ok.
¿Cambia mucho la dieta?
Fíjate que antes sí, porque eran las purines, o sea, los alimentos que tienen